Welcome back to Heightscast, a podcast of the Heights School. This is Rich Moss with you from the campus of the Heights in Potomac, Maryland. We're here to talk about the education and the formation of young men fully alive in the liberal arts tradition. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for continuing to share us, our mission, and our vision of education with your friends. We are most grateful. Today, I'm just delighted to welcome back to the podcast Mr. Joe Cardenas. Welcome back, Joe.
Thank you so much.
And Joe is the head of mentoring here at the Heights, also teaches upper school art history to mostly juniors and seniors, maybe a couple of intrepid sophomores. But Joe, in addition, has just having been here for now 30 years, which is remarkable, taught me back in the day. You've probably taught teachers of teachers at this point, if I had to think about
Close to it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's pretty cool.
Maybe.
But in any event, one of the things that you do, Joe, and sort of the topic of today's conversation, maybe they're not directly, I think they're definitely analogous and related, but it's this question of travel and vacation. So as we are coming up on summer, and as many of us are, kind of toggling between our Gmail tab and our Expedia and Airbnb tabs, a lot of us as parents are planning these trips for our families or vacations or whatever else, whether it's somewhere at the beach or somewhere in West Virginia, some beautiful mountain lake. Many of us think about how to change things up a little bit. And so, it's not, for us, certainly Crescite week is not a vacation at all as a teacher.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
But it's a lot of work. It's travel, but you have led, we were just talking, probably over 100 different trips of high school students, which is remarkable. And so today we're going to talk about how to take that experience of leading trips for our students and what are the things that we as parents can learn from that experience. How can we make our vacations this summer less consumeristic, consumptive, and more into opportunities for growth for our families. So it's timely and excited to bring your experience into this, Joe. It's going to be great.
Thank you so much for having me. I also should say that I reached out to all my colleagues and asked them about their family vacations, things that have worked for them, etc., and also my own experience growing up in Spain and kind of things that my parents did as well for family vacations. So it's all that. So Crescite, my own colleagues, and of course my own experience as well growing up. So vacations have become kind of filling out a bucket list. I mean, how many people say, oh, that's something, it's in my bucket list, I'd like to do that. And I think the moment you say that vacation is a bucket list, it's another thing to do. As opposed to a chance for growth, a chance to explore, a chance to develop better relationship with your spouse, with your kids, with your friends. And I think the moment that you make a vacation a checklist, then it becomes a burden that you have to do. It's, oh my goodness, I'm missing this and missing that. So you're always kind of this rat race to see more things, to see more nice buildings, more paintings, take more pictures. I'm being a little cynical here, but it is true. I mean, how often you go to a museum and people just snapping selfies next to a famous painting. And okay, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but how about just standing in front of the picture for 10 minutes if you can, or talking to your son about the painting or having prepped for it, and as opposed to like immediately uploading it to your Instagram account. And so I think the purpose of this podcast, what I was thinking is, how do we make vacations an occasion for growth, for development, for relationship that can improve, and as opposed to overbooked itineraries like, oh my gosh, we're going to see this, I'm going to see that. And you get to your hotel at the end of the day and you say, okay, I'm so tired.
Yeah.
Or you get home after 5 or 6 days abroad, 5 or 6 days somewhere in the West Coast, and you're exhausted and I need a vacation from my vacation.
Yes.
And you probably have heard that from your colleagues before.
Totally. Maybe I've said it too.
I know I have sometimes.
You get home and just absolutely, totally smoked.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, how many of us have seen, that's one of the things I love about being in DC is being able to go to the fabulous museums that are here, or to the National Gallery, which I know has a special place in your heart, Joe, and you've shared that with so many of us. But you can just go in and just sit there and enjoy. But it is true. You also see people just kind of frenetically racing through. It's like painting, selfie, painting, selfie, painting, selfie.
Yeah.
And it's not the experience I don't think that the artists wanted. But anyway, tell us more, like what have vacations, what else is there to be said about what we do on our vacations? I mean, you've mentioned the bucket list approach where it's like, okay, we're going to be in this city. Well, then you've got to see this, 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 and this, and this. What are the other shortcomings in our approach to vacation?
Yeah, I think also that we think that the more expensive the vacation, kind of the better it's going to be. I think I was looking online, like what's the average cost of a week-long vacation for a family of 4? And it said that it ranges between $5,000 and $10,000. And you say, okay, well, great, some people can afford that, but is that the best possible way to spend time with your family after having worked the whole year? You have a week off, or maybe have a little more time, and is it just because you spend a lot of money doesn't mean it's going to be a good vacation?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the case. But I think for many people have equated expensive vacations with good vacations, or vacations that are actually going to help us rest. And I strongly disagree with that. I actually think you can have vacations that are not expensive, that can be tremendously fruitful and serve the purpose that a vacation should have, which is to rest and to become better as a person. I think the other thing that vacations have become, and I touched upon it a few minutes ago, is the screen time, that everything has to be mediated through a screen, and I have to make sure that everybody that I know has to know what I'm doing right now, that I'm right before the Pantheon, that I'm right before this other cool beach or whatever, as opposed to spending time and sharing the time with the people who are with you at that moment in front of you. So I think, my sister just went on her honeymoon, got married last April.
Congratulations.
And thank you. They put away their phones. They disappeared for 10 days. And 10 days later, suddenly they reappeared. And my sister said, I wanted to spend time with my husband. I didn't want to have to share everything that I do with everyone. They were in Istanbul. They were in a beautiful place, but we didn't get one single picture. And I thought to myself, now that's a vacation, right? Where you disconnect. Now, sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes we need to share things with others, and it's wonderful. Maybe our grandparents are waiting for pictures. That's great. But the reason is for others, not so that people can see where we are,
right?
Which I think ends up, diminishing the experience, I think, of what a vacation should be.
Yeah.
So I think that's another area. So besides the bucket list, I think screen time and kind of feeling that you have to share everything with everyone right away. And then the thing of money. Those 3 things, I think, have turned our vacations into things that are not pleasant anymore. Or they're pleasant but exhausting.
Yes.
And so that's what I would say.
Totally. Yeah, there's a great Seneca quote that I chuckle at sometimes. He's obviously writing to his nephew. I think it's his nephew. I shouldn't say obviously. But he says, do you suppose that you alone have had this experience of being unsettled after travel? Are you surprised? As if it were a novelty that after such long travel and so many changes of scene, you have not been able to shake off the gloom and heaviness of your mind? You need a change of soul rather than a change of climate.
Wow. I had never heard that quote before.
Pretty good,
but
right?
That's precisely what we're talking about here.
Yeah. It's like, no, you can't.
It's a change of soul.
Your problem necessarily. But I do think that vacation can offer a context and a place where if you're structuring it the right way, you can experience true leisure with people you love as you're beholding something beautiful, and that is a good place to be. Yeah, and I think the other, the screen piece of it. On one hand, you have the sort of this idea that you need the validation of the experiences that you're having, as if like seeing the thing is not worth it unless somebody else is validating the fact that you've seen the thing. But then there's also, just the fact of increased screen time, just sitting on your phone and like scrolling through Instagram or whatever. Having a movie's great every once in a while. I love a good movie. But you go on vacation at the beach or something, and all of a sudden, there's a show on in the morning, and there's a movie every night, and next thing you know, it's like you're watching 5 hours of TV a day. Like, what
so much this? For vacation.
Yeah, totally. So I think you're inviting us in a beautiful and timely way to reimagine the purpose of vacation. I like how you put that. help us. What is the purpose of vacation, or how should we reimagine it?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is rest. I know it sounds crazy, but yeah, rest. And our vacations end up being not restful. So maybe as you think of where you're going to go and what are you going to do, think, is my family going to rest with this? Are they going to find peace? Are they going to be able to like let their guard down, or are they going to be on the move all the time to the point where you're not resting? Mm-hmm. And resting, I think St. Josemaria said, doesn't mean not doing anything, but it's changing what we do in a way that our soul can rest. It's not restless. It's really a time where you can have a conversation, that you don't feel like you're rushing to the next thing. Mm-hmm. So the first question that I would ask myself as I prepare a vacation is my family going to rest? Are we going to be able to do that?
So I think that's super important, because that especially, for many of us who this isn't like so many things. It's not like we're trying to exhaust our families. Mm-hmm. We're trying to give them a good thing.
Yeah.
Like we're in DC. We're going to go to this museum until 11, that museum until noon. And then we're going to go across town and get this great, lunch or whatever at Ben's Chili Bowl. And then we're going to go take a tour of the Capitol building. Yeah. And then it comes from a really good place of trying to show your family beautiful things.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's consistent with the idea of rest. Can you just unpack that a little bit for us? Like if I'm a dad, I'm planning a vacation, what are the kind of the markers of rest that I'm looking for? Is it time? Is it place? Like how do I help my family rest?
Okay. That's a great question. And let me see. So I'm going to go back to growing up with my parents and my siblings. And we had this tradition, my parents started this tradition that after meals, and we had a house right on the beach. So we lived in northern Spain, and in the summer we went to southern Spain and we spent there a couple of weeks. And my parents had this rule, and it was sort of lived in, not as a rule like you got to do this, but it was just understood that after the main meal of the day, which in Spain happens to be lunchtime, we would actually rest. And it wasn't like siesta time. It was more, we actually read. It was assumed that after a big meal, instead of going to the ocean, instead of going to the pool or whatever, we would read. And it was an hour of quiet time, literally. Now, I understood later that my dad did like to take a siesta at that point, but the rest of us were just reading. And we sat at the dining room table and we read for an hour. And I would say it was very conducive, right? Because to reading, because everybody was doing it. We didn't have their phones with us, but there were no phones back then. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that it's a sort of interesting kind of vignette of what my dad used to do. We used to, like in kind of as the summer vacation approached, he would take each one of us individually to the bookstore. And we would kind of walk through the aisles and find a couple of books for the summer. And of course, I thought I had picked the books, but little did I know, my dad knew exactly what I had to pick. But he would be like, what do you think of this book? And I would eventually pick the books he wanted. And those are the books I read during the summer. And it was always after the meal. That worked for us. I think each family needs to find out when is the best time. Another thing might be not rushing after a meal. Like maybe you sit down and linger. And, when I go on trips like Peru or Crescite trips, when we have a meal, no one gets up from the meal until we've said grace at the end. So all the guys know that even though you finish eating, you just stay there. So what ends up happening is you have these conversations, kind of lingering conversation after meals. You're not rushing to the next thing. So that could be another thing where kind of in Spanish, they have a word called sobremesa, right? Which is what you do after a meal. Instead of rushing out, you just linger and maybe get some coffee. And in the old days, have a little, limoncello or something, but it's a time for spending time together. And somehow our parents got us to draw us out and asking questions. And, sometimes, of course, there will be arguments. I think every family has those. And they will be like,
Don't know what you mean.
Mr. So, my sister did that. No, it wasn't me. And it's not my turn to do the dishes. I think another thing we used to do, and maybe this is, I don't know if it's proper, but after meals and we started cleaning up, we used to say the rosary together as we cleaned up. I don't know. That's another way of kind of quiet, kind of meditation, meditative prayer. So those are two things right there that we used to do growing up. And again, each family is going to have to find a way to make that happen.
Yeah.
Another thing I would say, and it's another, you quoted Seneca just now, and there's another Roman writer, and I can't remember his name right now, but he used to say, not multa sed multum. Not a lot of things, but the things you do them really well. So instead of visiting 2 museums, just visit 1 museum. And instead of visiting every picture in the museum, do some homework beforehand and pick 10 good pictures. And if you're not familiar with the museum, ask someone who knows before you go. And then you'll see how suddenly the museum is not this sort of, we've got to see every picture because, I want to go back and be able to say that I saw everything. But rather, we saw 10 of them, and you actually prepare for them. And then you can tell your kids about, hey, this is a painting that is interesting because of this, this, and that. So that's another, with ChatGPT, you can do that, by the way. I know AI can be not a good tool, but if it's used properly, it can be very powerful.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. Totally. Yeah. No, I really like that. I think at some point I heard you say that, gosh, they go to the National Gallery to take in 1 painting.
Yeah.
I think that's such a cool
I'm gonna
thought.
giving a tour to friends of mine in a couple of weeks, and I'm only gonna show them 10 paintings. That's it.
I love that.
I
love that. Yeah. What else? What other purposes of vacation? I know we've talked about, there's questions of rest, of making it actual, opportunities for reflection. I think this just sounds so leisurely. You've mentioned renewal. So just tell us more about the purpose of vacation.
So let me first start with reflection.
Great.
And one of the things that I've done in Crescite trips, and again, this is not quite the same thing. These are high school kids, and it's not a family. And I think a lot of the things I want to say depends a lot on the age of your kids. Right? If you have little kids, it's very different than if you have high school kids, right? Or you probably have a mix, maybe. So you have to tailor things accordingly to the age. But one of the things I do is every day we have quiet time. And this is something I learned as a kid, but this is the guys can read, or we can also pray. So we maybe read a few points from scripture, and we're quiet. Maybe in the car, and we turn off the radio. We don't do anything. It's hey guys, for the next half hour, it's just going to be quiet. And some of the guys are reading. Some of the guys are reading the scripture. Some of the guys are maybe reading to a few points of St. Jose Maria's The Way. You can decide how you use that time. But just making the time for quiet and for reflection, one thing that I would recommend if you're going to do that is let the guys know in advance. Let your children, hey, by the way, in an hour or so, we're going to go quiet mode. And you'll see some of the guys will sleep. But I think having that chance for that quiet is really important. Because I think some of the guys may reflect. Some of the guys may come up with questions. It's a battle, by the way. Silence is a battle. We are very afraid of it. It sounds like we are, I don't know if it's silence is sort of this very embarrassing time, but I think it's really powerful. But you have to work at it, and it's not easy.
Yeah.
Because watching a movie, putting a movie to your little kids is going to be very easy. They're going to be disconnected for a while. We can not worry about them for a while, but working at that possibility of silence is really important.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, and honestly, it takes a certain inner silence, a disposition of inner silence to have that sobremesa moment after dinner where you're lingering, because you can't, that in and of itself is kind of this, it's sort of it can be, there's some active aspects to it. You've got to ask the right questions and have a conversation, but there's also kind of a certain passive receptivity where you're trying to draw out a 6-year-old.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And you have to behold the child in a way that is difficult in light of our just furious tech-driven mode of life, where everything's so fast, and so in a way it's we almost need a pre-vacation retreat as parents, and well, no, that's not possible. But how do you slow down your mind as you head into that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
And I think it would be helpful as you prepare your vacations, asking questions. I wrote a few here.
Please.
So instead of asking where do I want to go, what do I want to see, what's missing from my bucket list, maybe asking questions like, how can my family rest? How could this vacation make us better? Who do we want to become? Like, those are much deeper questions. They're difficult to answer. And again, for each family, it's going to be different. But if your starting point are questions like that, your vacation will show an approach that's very different. And so, yeah, I'm going to the Pantheon. Great. But let me plan it a little bit better. Let me spend, how is visiting the Pantheon going to make my family better? Or how is going to, how is, I don't know, how it's going to make me rest. So that means you're going to plan it out a little more. I would say a vacation that is more fruitful, that is more restful and more reflective, is going to take a lot of thinking time.
Yeah.
A lot of pre-planning, because it doesn't happen accidentally. Accidentally, it's going to be the bucket list because it's very easy. Oh, we got it. We did it, right? Yep. You have this sense of accomplishment. I did get to see the Mona Lisa. I went to the Eiffel Tower. And then, I had that coffee at that cafe that appears in TripAdvisor. I got it. Check. The other type of vacation, it's very difficult to see how you're doing. It's going to take you a while to know, hey, was this family vacation reflective? Was this family vacation, did it help us grow? Those are very difficult things to answer.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking about it beforehand, I think even if you end up in in a cruise, you can make it reflective, perhaps, right? It's going to be a lot harder, but it's possible.
Yes.
Like, for example, one thing that I always do, and I really enjoy, when we visit a church, I was in Rome recently with about 15 high school students and some college guys. And every time we went to a church, before going in, I said, hey, before you see anything, let's make a beeline to the Blessed Sacrament. Spend a couple minutes there. Don't go in as a tourist. Go in as a Christian who's praying, as a pilgrim. And then go see, the nice painting of Michelangelo, the nice statue of Donatello. But first, see the Lord of the house. And I think that takes, again, planning, right? Where is the Blessed Sacrament? How do I do that? So I don't know if that
totally
helps kind of this sense of reflection. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the sense it's almost like that preparation work that you do to go and see the site or behold the work or climb the mountain or whatever. When you arrive, in a certain sense, I mean, you've made it your own, and so when you go and you encounter the thing, it's like you're encountering something that already belongs to you in some way, shape, or form, and it's like you're just more at home in the world, which I think is great, instead of just being kind of like a consumer snacking. I like that. Where do we to think about, to think as parents, when we come back from this, we want our family to be XYZ, and really having that spelled out, and then obviously letting that drive some of the choices you make logistically about your time away. That's great. Please.
Yeah, I was going to say, one very important aspect of a family vacation is the spiritual component. And again, depends a lot on the age of your kids, how far you're going to try to go this direction, that direction. But for example, one of the things that can be really helpful is praying the rosary, maybe in the car, like in a long drive, you're going to, the Midwest, and you got to pull out the beads. And I remember as a kid, my parents had this massive rosary. I don't know where they bought it, but it was literally like 4 foot long, and it had the beads were the size of ping pong. And we used to fight to lead a decade because it was so cool to have that big rosary in your hands, So, I mean, you have to think about what's the right thing for a family, but for us, that was like a big deal. And literally we used to fight who would lead the rosary with the big rosary. Going to Mass at a local parish in another country, you're not a tourist, you're home, right? When you go to Mass and suddenly you see, the mom with kids, and you see the guy, the businessman, and you're there again, like everybody else on their daily life, and you're part of that, right? You're not a foreigner. You're not a tourist. You are home. You're a pilgrim. And even the way, I would even say the way you dress can have an effect on the way you approach these trips. When I go on trips with the young guys, the Camino, for example, or, we used to go, remember in Mexico, I would always ask the guys to dress well. Yeah. Not over the top, right? When they go on the plane, because we're not just like wearing shorts and a t-shirt, sweats and a t-shirt because I want to be comfortable. I'm there because I'm in a journey. I'm a traveler. I'm on a way to, or a pilgrim.
Yeah.
By the way, this is a funny story. I don't know if we have time for this, but
Of course. Yeah. Okay.
I remember one of my early trips to the Camino. If you're not familiar with the Camino, it's a pilgrimage route in northwestern Spain that's become very popular. And I told the guys, I was telling them about how important it is to dress well, that we're pilgrims, we're not just hanging out. So a lot of the guys left the heights with their coat and tie and their backpacks. They had their, all the gear was in their backpacks. And so we got to our destination and our bags were lost.
Oh my gosh.
And we were going to go hiking the next day.
Oh, man.
So we had nothing except coats and ties and, penny loafers. And so that morning, woke up, massive snowstorm that night. So we woke up in the morning, there was like a foot of snow everywhere. And all we had were, again, our coats and ties and chinos and whatever. So we said, well, we're here, let's do this, So we hiked that first day, 20 miles with what we had. So sometimes it backfires.
Yeah.
But the guys still talk about it. It was more than 20 years ago. Wow. And thankfully, by the time we got to our destination, our bags had arrived and, we were more civilized the next day.
Yeah. Or less.
Or less civilized, yeah.
That's incredible.
But I think how you carry yourself, how you dress, how you speak about the vacation to your kids as your, how you call yourself. I'm not a tourist. We're I don't know, pilgrims. We're I don't know. We're here to discover. We're discoverers. I think the words you use, the way you prepare for the vacation, it's really important because your children will pick up on what you mean by that vacation and what you hope to get from it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think this is one of those things where it can be helpful. One of the reasons we travel, I think, as a school is because we want our boys to be exposed to just cultures all over the place. So they realize that what they think is just, universal is not actually so. And I think one of these things that is not as universal as our students might hope is attire. I mean, as Americans, we are so unbelievably casual. You go to other countries and the thought of, walking around in sweatpants or whatever else, or PJs to class is completely anathema. And it's not any sort of like moral thing. It's just sort of like there's this cultural abhorrence of the prospect of going to class in your pajama pants, So, it's a great opportunity to dress things up a little bit, have respect for the family, the people you're going to see. That's awesome. So great. I mean, all those really good purposes of vacation, to rest, to be renewed, and just to come back in a manner that's conducive to good life afterwards. So you've already given us a ton of practical ideas, but what sort of what any other greatest hits as far as advice to make these vacations really kind of mission-driven, mission-aligned for our families?
Yeah. I think one way to think about this is plan people before places. So think always on the person rather than the place. What I mean by this is, for example, maybe you only go to one place a day instead of like, you were talking about museums, right? Go to one museum and then spend a long time having lunch. And yes, you'll miss the other museum. Okay, not the end of the world. Right? Because it's not a bucket list.
Yeah.
What you want is your family to rest, not to complete all these checklists. That's not easy, right? Because you have to pull back sometimes. So as you plan ahead, it's like, okay, let me do one thing this morning. We're going to have a nice lunch in this park, right? And not every meal should be purchased. It's okay to buy some like baguettes and some cold cuts and just go to a park nearby. But you're going to have to do your homework. Like, what park am I going to go to? Is it safe, right? If it's maybe it's a wonderful park, but maybe it's not so nice. You gotta make sure that you plan things well, But think of like, how do I get my family to rest? And that will dictate what places you'll visit in a day. Because otherwise you'll be driving this sort of like, we need to see this and this and this. So in the back of your mind, people before places. So planning for people. I think prioritizing meal times, I already mentioned that a couple times, but linger in the meals. Like, it's okay. It's not just oh, I need food now. That way you put gas in the car and then I'm going to get food and then move on. Meals are a great time to talk, to also teach manners. If there's a way also that you can invite someone, right? That a local guy that you know, maybe there's a friend of a friend. Can they come with you and spend time with you in the meal? I would say in this idea of plan people before places, it's find roles for each family member. So if you're going to go, camping, well, maybe you ask one of your sons or one of your daughters to be the one who's in charge of sleeping bags. Now, it may happen that you get there's no sleeping bags. So you have to double check things, but try to spread out kind of roles for each family member as much as possible in a way that they all feel like, oh, this is my vacation too. It's not just mom and dad doing everything. But, maybe there's a 6-year-old kid. Maybe he can bring a book. Maybe he can bring, I don't know, just give him something to do, even if it's very small. So getting everyone involved in some way in preparing the vacation. Maybe if you're going to a museum and you have a son or a daughter who's in high school, maybe ask him or her to prepare one of the paintings. Maybe they can go online and kind of figure out what to do. So again, that's far more important than the painting, is that your son or your daughter feels a sense of accomplishment, feels a sense like, wow, this is a vacation. My parents are trusting me with this. I don't know. Maybe they are angry that you're entrusting them with this, but they're like, oh, I don't want to do it. It's a good fight. It's a fight worth fighting. I think one of the idea might be maybe one of the guys can do the journal of the trip. I still keep diaries from trips.
Do you really?
Yes, I have a few
That's
of them.
super cool, Joe.
And I remember actually your brother, Eddie, one time I was going to the Camino, and this was a couple of years ago. He went many, many years ago. He was a freshman. Now he's married with kids and everything. But I remember I was going to the Camino, and he sent me an email saying, by the way, this is what I wrote that day. And it was like 10 years later. And I just thought, wow, what an incredible thing, right? To have someone keep track of the events of that, the diary of the trip. My grandfather actually, he loved to travel, and he was a very, very good man. And actually, I remember I learned something from him, many things from him, but one of them was whenever he heard of a new city or new country and he didn't know what it was, he said, I would never go to bed that day without checking the atlas. Atlas, who checks Atlas nowadays, right? But he had a big one in the coffee table, and he would check like, oh, this is where Kuala Lumpur is, right? And so I think having a diary is a really cool thing, knowing where everything is. But he used to he had something called the DOFO. It's Spanish for documents and photographs. So he would buy one of these like marble notebooks, and so for example, they would go to a restaurant and there was like the receipt, and he would tape it. And they said, we ate this and it was super good. And maybe the waitress was really funny. And then they would go to a museum and then he would keep the ticket of the museum. So we have these DOFOs, right? These documents and photographs.
I love it.
Going back decades, right, of his different travels. I remember reading his, he was in World War II. And he actually took a train across France and into Germany. And every stop of the way, he wrote down, I went to this restaurant. And so having a diary, these roles, like every, people before places can make a big difference in this idea of the journal, for example, or maybe there's one who's the photographer for the trip, right? And instead of each one taking his own pictures, you have one of the kids take pictures, and they have a presentation at the end. So anyway, those are things that you can do. This idea of if you put people before places, you'll immediately find ways. Like you look at the vacation differently. Because the starting point is us, not a church or a castle or a painting. So
I love it. And I mean, how do you? Can you say more about that? I mean, it seems like the way to put the people before the place is to, and again, these are more your words from previous conversations than entirely your words, not mine, but just the way to do that is in some way to kind of layer meaning on top, right, of the things you're seeing in the trip itself, because as meaning-making entities, as these rational creatures, where maybe that's part of the purpose of the vacation is to just help us find meaning in the broader world that we can then bring back with us in a way that is restful and refreshed. But how do you add these sorts of how do you add meaning to a vacation, a trip to the beach, or whatever else?
Yeah. So, for example, I mean, this is something my family growing up we used to do. So, we lived in northern Spain, and we had to travel to southern Spain by car. Mm-hmm. And there's a number of rivers that go across the Iberian Peninsula. So, my dad had come up with a poem. So, every time you crossed a river, he had a poem, very short, maybe like 2 or 3 lines. And it always had a spiritual component to it. So when you cross this river, he say the name of the river, you have to say a memorare because the waters will take it to the shrine of Our Lady down the stream, So we had like 7 or 8 poems. Wow. And there were 7 rivers that we would cross. And it also kind of gave a little sense of like, we're progressing in our trip. Mm-hmm. But so a couple of things with that. One, it adds the layer of geography, right? So I know all the rivers across Spain, because we used to say a poem every time we crossed one, right? And we kind of look forward. Are we crossing that river? Are we almost there? Right? And then, let's say so that's the first thing, right? Geography. You have a sense of place. I think the layer of spiritual life, right? That every poem was sort of like a prayer. That so it always was linked to a decade of the Rosary or a memorare, so that's another example where you're adding in a very natural way in something you're already doing. Suddenly you have geography, you have spiritual life, memorization, right? Because there's a challenge of who remembers the poem for this river, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember competing for like memorizing everything. So you add that component of like working together. That's one example, but I think
I love it.
Each family has to figure out a way where you add those layers. But they're there. It's just the moment you're more aware of what you're trying to accomplish, then suddenly you'll be like, oh, this is a very natural thing. We're going to go past this church and they have adoration. Let's stop for 10 minutes and then we'll continue on. Just the way we stop for gas or for a coffee. You stop because you happen to know that there is a church that has perpetual adoration, right? So suddenly you're adding these layers without having to add, there's no cost involved, right? It's just the thoughtfulness, the kind of like, why am I doing this? If I want my family to rest, if I want my family to grow, then you're going to have to think through things a lot more than just like, well, we're going to Disney, everything is prepared.
Right.
I don't need to do anything. That's, I think, a recipe for disaster. And then you come back and you're tired, you haven't accomplished anything. That's kind of a little too dire. Disney is wonderful.
You've accomplished too many things.
So
no, that's awesome. And it seems like that question of how to layer meaning into the experience, that's a prospective effort. There's also a kind of a retrospective effort of trying to find the meaning in the things that you've beheld together as a family. Another way of adding meaning, but any other ways to kind of help? I love the idea of a journal. That's amazing. I just discovered my grandmother's travel journal from the 1940s and 1950s, I guess. But it's so interesting to see not only where she'd been, but also just the different markers of the experience. Like when you got on a ship or something, friends would send flowers to your cabin or like little gifts, things like that. It was such a thoughtful time. Obviously, every time has its pros and its cons, but there's something to be learned from that. But so the journal, a great way of like looking backwards and finding meaning in what you've experienced. How about other ways that families can kind of look back and be more reflective? I
think maybe reading a book together. Maybe it's a short book. I mean, these are not easy things, by the way. All right, because if you have younger kids, that's going to be very difficult. But I've discovered that reading a book together can be a helpful thing. You have to choose what you pick. You don't want also the vacation to become like homework, right? Oh, we're going to see this church and we're all going to pray, right? That can be heavy-handed as well. It has to come. I go back to this preparation. I think what's most important is what you do before. Yeah. The more you prepare, the more you think through it, then all things are going to seem very natural. Yeah. Like, oh yeah, we're going to stop. Look at this. Oh, look at that. What a coincidence. Yeah. Well, you've done your homework, right? Yes. And the guys are going to. But if you if it seems heavy-handed, and sorry, I'm not answering your question right away, but
No,
if it's
so
heavy-handed, the way you kind of like, no, now we're going to be more reflective, and this is what we're going to do. And
contemplate, Johnny.
Yeah, that's going to backfire very
Yeah.
quickly. So the more natural everything seems. So in the back of your mind, you have a schedule, but it's very flexible. I think that will make everything you do, you'll be more reflective yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because I think reflection, thoughtfulness, quietness comes from the parents. The kids are not going to be that way, right? But they're natural, they're young and they're moving around. You have to project that. And you project that because you've prepared things well. And then you can come in and, oh yeah, look at this. Let's look at this painting. Look at this. Amazing. It's a Velasquez or it's a Rembrandt. Oh, let's talk about this for a second. What do you see? And suddenly you're exuding that peace and that quiet, that reflectiveness that it's impossible if you haven't planned beforehand. But I think, so I would say, and I'm sorry for repeating myself in terms of that preparation, but it will create memorable times when you're not rushing, you're not trying to figure out what to do, you're because you know where you are and you know what you want to accomplish. Yeah. So, but yeah, mention the thing of the book, or maybe you have a couple of poems that, let's see who knows it by the end of the trip. You know, you're going to challenge them to something like that. I'm not sure. I think a lot depends on the family, and you have to look at your family dynamics and what will work and what won't. Yeah. Maybe some of the things I've said, you are thinking, Cardenas, that's crazy. That would never work, right? But maybe you're like, wow, I'm going to try that. And maybe you try it and it doesn't work, right? But maybe because you're being more reflective, you'll come up with your own ideas and what's best for your family. Yeah,
totally. And I think that the mistake might be to kind of take down every single thing you've just shared with us and make it into a checklist. And then instead of going through, going site to site, museum to museum, we end up, kind of over scheduling the unscheduled time in a way. So I think, not many things, but is great guidance.
One thing that, maybe going back to the question you asked, I'll be more reflective. One thing that might be interesting is to kind of, at the end of the day, hanging out and just maybe a campfire. Yeah. Hey, highs and lows. What's been the high point for you today? What's been the low point? That can be a source of great conversation. Sometimes it's a dud. Yeah. And what was your high? It was boring. Okay. All right. So I usually start with the lows. Yeah. But I've done that in every trip that I go. I always ask the questions. And it's amazing what you get. Yeah. Like, wow, that was your high? I was just talking to one of the students who went on my Crescite trip to northern Spain. And it was a wonderful trip. But we did have a couple situations were a little tricky. Our passports. 3 passports were stolen in France, and we had to go to the embassy to get new passports. But let's just say that for a limited time, one of the teachers was in Madrid with the kids in the embassy. Father Diego was trying to get a new van because the van was broken into, we got to get a new window. So I was by myself with the other guys, And at one point, I just said, listen, you have to be here by yourselves in the Airbnb for a few hours. It wasn't too long. It was, these guys are old enough. And I said, listen, you got to prepare dinner. I'm going to be back in like a couple hours. And I came back. They sent pictures like, hey, we set up the table. They prayed the rosary together by themselves. And then I asked them at the end of the trip, it was highs and lows. And one of them said that you trusted us and we were by ourselves for those 2 or 3 hours, and that sense of freedom and responsibility. But had I not asked the highs and lows, I would have never known that. Yeah. And it led to a great conversation about trips and traveling and responsibility and freedom. Now, these are obviously older guys and they're much more reflective. But I can see an 8-year-old boy or a 10-year-old girl like, well, my high was this particular thing. And those are conversations you elicit their comments and they're reflecting about what they've done that day. Or maybe you wait till the end of the day. I don't know. You can decide the end of the trip, and decide when is the best time to ask questions like that. But it helps the guys think and be reflective.
Yeah, so. And learn from each other,
yeah.
Which is neat. Yeah. And then also, this is one of those things where it seems like in a way, the Sabbath is sort of a microcosm for the week where you should try to find I think if you know how to rest well on the Sabbath, then parts of that will come into the week.
Yeah.
And similarly here with a good vacation, hopefully parts of the vacation can be carried with you into the year.
Yeah.
And that high-low one that's a great one. And it can become sort of a habit almost on a daily basis sometimes, even if, if you're kind of struggling in the beginning with that, it can grow into kind of a neat ritual for your family. So, gosh, a lot of good points. Any final closing thoughts, Mr. Cardenas? This has been awesome.
Takeaways, think before you go.
Yeah.
I can't emphasize that enough. I'm thinking of my own travels with the Crescite trips here that we do with the students, is even the word Crescite, how you name your vacation.
Mm-hmm.
Crescite means to grow. So immediately I'm thinking, okay, well, if I want these kids to grow, how am I going to do that? Mm-hmm. How are they going to grow in their relationship with their peers? How are they going to grow spiritually, culturally? So I think the more time you spend thinking about your vacation, about what you want to accomplish, kind of the questions that I mentioned at the beginning, mm-hmm. How is my family going to rest? How is my family going to grow? How are they going to come more closer together? Mm-hmm. The more you think about that, the better your vacation will be. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to say it doesn't matter what you do, but if you have the right approach, then the end result, whether if it's the beach, the mountain, traveling to Europe, or whatever, you'll have the right approach, mm-hmm. and you'll benefit tremendously from that time, and you will rest. You will rest. So
imagine coming home from vacation rested,
fully rested.
Wow, I want that. Take that, Seneca. No, there's something for us in Seneca, and there's a whole lot for us right here as well. It seems like you are identifying some of the pitfalls and giving some good guidance on how to counteract some of those things that Seneca's highlighting. Yeah. So
the bucket list. You got to fight it.
Fight the bucket list. Yeah, fight the kind of like buildings and pictures and museums and all the rest of it as Doritos, and you're just trying to cram as much in your mouth as possible. Rest. So beautiful. Well, Joe, this has been great. Thank you for this conversation. Congratulations on the near conclusion of another academic year here, the 30th.
Almost there.
Holy smokes. But this is great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. And thank you for listening. To support Joe's work here at the Heights, leading all sorts of trips and teaching all sorts of great classes, please do consider supporting the Heights financially. To do that, visit heightsforum.org. Click on support. Everything you do is incredibly, incredibly appreciated. While you're there, you can also learn more about the upcoming teaching workshop, the Teaching Essentials Workshop here on campus this June. This is a workshop for teaching men hosted by Mr. Austin Hatch and Tom Steenson. Should be a great, great week. And in addition, we continue to be excited for the upcoming Convivium Conference. This is a conference for teaching men, November of 2025, featuring Arthur Brooks and other friends of the school. Should be absolutely awesome. To learn more, visit heightsforum.org. Thanks for being a part of the tribe, and we'll talk to you next week.